Everyone, I hope that you are doing well. Recording from the floor of my living room, so if you see the big streak of white, of course it's the cat. I wanted to check in first off logistically. For some reason, the link for last welcome video was down at the bottom of our page and not top, so I apologize for that confusion, but I did look and see it still had several views, so it looks like you found it, but I'm sorry if that produced any confusion, and I'll make sure that does not happen again. You have done a wonderful job with Module 5 on the Invisible Gifted. Excuse me, I'm also a little sick. And I have particularly loved looking at these statements that you wrote from the perspective of a child who may be underrepresented in terms of gifted education. That is such a powerful activity because it really helps you to see from the perspective of a student. And we definitely, as a culture, have an assumption about what it means to be gifted and what it looks like to be gifted. And hopefully you're combating a lot of those assumptions throughout this class. So, as I mentioned last week, I've been really impressed by the way that you guys have progressed beyond just the readings and have started to think how you can practically make change in your own classrooms. So, great job on that. Just a couple things to introduce our module on creativity. So I do want to kind of put this in your brain. After this module on creativity, which will last 2 weeks, we will have a different type of module in which you have an independent study. There is not a final exam for this class, which I know makes several of you guys happy. So your final project is an independent research project, and it's not a paper, it's in a presentation style. You can skip ahead if you want to and look at what the requirements are, but the most important thing right now is for you all to be thinking of a topic that you want to research on your own. So several of you have expressed interest in Twice Exceptional is one I've seen lots of you commenting on. Issues with underrepresentation as well. I have had some interesting questions about acceleration. Anything that we have discussed in class or maybe not discussed that you would like to kind of delve into deeper. That's something that you want to be thinking about. Again, that's 2 weeks from now, but as we're starting to wrap up our content, it's a good thing to keep that on your mind. So feel free to look into that module and ask me any questions you may have. That presentation is pretty self-explanatory, and you are creating a PowerPoint presentation with some additional resources for your students to, not your students, well, yes, your fellow students, for your fellow students to look into. So real quick, jumping into creativity, this case study is, as always, it's a real true story, but this one is actually me. So and most of you know my background, my research is heavily in creativity, and that was my area of interest and focus for my doctoral program. So it's my bread and butter, and I love it. When I was in the classroom, particularly in the gifted classroom, I could not wait to do a lot of these creative teaching strategies, and my students freaked out. They were very uncomfortable with this idea of thinking creatively. They wanted a rubric that told them exactly what to do, and they wanted to make sure they got an A. This should be sounding like a high achiever. So it was definitely an interesting experience for me and helped me realize that students really need to be taught what creativity is and how we can support creative thinking in the classroom. So I won't say too much, but I want you to keep a couple of things on your mind as you're looking through this research. Just like giftedness, there's not one definition for creativity. Usually we talk about creativity in what's called the 4 Ps. So we have creative process. So that's the process that we go through to produce creative thought, or sometimes it ends in production. You'll see specific articles that are clearly based on the creative process. The second P is creative person. So there are specific characteristics which are typically indicative of creative individuals. One of those is a risk taker, also openness to experience. A big thing we look for in terms of creativity is finding problems. So some of your articles and videos will focus on the creative person. Your third P is the creative product. And just to be clear, a product doesn't have to be like tangible, like my pen. A product could also be an idea. When we think about product, this goes into what's called a standard definition of creativity. And we think, we don't think, the theorists propose that in order for a product to be creative, it needs to be both original, which is new, but also useful. It could be useful for the individual, but it needs to have some kind of purpose. The classic example of this is if you just started speaking gibberish, it would be new, but it wouldn't be very useful. Now, if we're looking at children, it could be useful to them because they have their own language happening. But usually we think of creative product in terms of that, those two qualities. The last P is, no, I already said person. The last P is press. Easier way to think about press is environment. So what are the environments that are conducive to creativity? If you're familiar with Google, which I'm sure you are, and you have done any investigation of their headquarters or seen some of the movies about them, there's definitely a lot of work in terms of creating the physical and the cultural environment that will be conducive to creativity. So 4 Ps: person, product, press, process. Beyond that, I don't want to say too much more, but I do want you to take note. If you are immediately thinking right now, I'm not creative, then we're going to challenge that. And I want you to shift from being creative to having creative potential. We have a lot of biases in terms of what creativity means, but hopefully you can expand that through looking at the literature and watching the information for this week. So, couple of recaps. Make sure that you are thinking through what topic you would like to research for your independent study. And this week we are completing our final case study. So just like always, I'll be looking for your initial response by Friday and your responses to your students by Sunday. Make sure that you're citing as usual. And of course, I'm always here if you have any questions. I know that I gave you a lot of information right there, but all of that info on creativity will be repeated. I just like to highlight the most important things. So as you're looking at the literature, keep your eyes out for those 4 Ps and keep your eyes out for any kind of bias about creativity. We often say we want to be creative in the classroom, but we don't really know what we're saying. So this is a really interesting activity for you all to do, and I'm looking forward to checking in. You know where my office is, and you know my email, so I'm always here to help. Thank you.